there. Welcome to your personalized deep dive. You sent over some really fascinating audio on negotiation.
Yeah, looks like some great stuff.
We are going to dig into it
Yeah.
just for you.
Awesome.
Today, focusing on autonomy, status, and roles. They're like the secret sauce for reaching, really solid agreements.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you know what? There's even a story in here about how to handle a sticky situation at a bar
Oh.
using a tactic you wouldn't expect at all.
I'm intrigued.
But we'll get to that a little later.
Okay.
First, let's talk about something called the ICN bucket system.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of this?
I have, yeah. It's a framework for deciding who gets to make which decisions in any relationship, really.
Yeah. And the audio mentions this consulting firm over in Cambridge
Yes.
that used ICN to get clarity on, who makes the calls among their partners.
Right, from like the everyday stuff
Yeah.
to the big picture, like strategic decisions.
Exactly. And they basically categorize all these decisions into 3 buckets: inform, consult, and negotiate. So like something small, like if you're grabbing coffee for the team.
Right, probably just inform people.
Yeah, exactly.
But then, like, hiring a new employee, you might need to consult with some people before making that decision.
Right. And then, of course, like the big stuff, bring on a new partner or selling the company, that's definitely in the negotiate bucket.
No question about it. And what's interesting is that it helps to reduce tension by getting those, questions of authority out in the open before they become a problem.
Yeah, I can see that.
It promotes transparency, fairness, which are so crucial for any kind of long-term agreement,
Yeah.
business partnership, team at work, even a marriage.
Okay, so how does this actually work in day-to-day life? Like you have to categorize every single decision. It just seems like it would get tedious.
Well, it's not about creating some exhaustive list, but more about a shared understanding of the principles behind each of those buckets. So for those informed decisions, the key is that, you have the authority to act independently, but you still inform others, kind of as a courtesy or just for, transparency.
Gotcha. Okay, so consult means you're going to gather input from others, think about those different perspectives, and then ultimately you're the one to make the call.
Right. And then negotiate. That means you need a consensus. You need an agreement from, everybody involved before moving forward.
Okay, so it sounds like it's more about the spirit of the system. You're not getting like bogged down in all the tiny specifics.
Exactly.
I can see how, even with those principles, like how some gray areas might pop up. Like what if one person thinks a decision is, a consult and the other person's like, no, this is definitely negotiate.
Right. And that's where really clear communication is key and a willingness to adapt. I mean, if there's disagreement, it's so important to have a conversation about why each person sees it that way.
I see, yeah.
Maybe there are some underlying concerns or values at play, that need to be addressed. The goal is to find a solution that respects everybody's autonomy, but still allows you to move forward effectively.
So the big takeaway here is that the ICN bucket system is all about setting clear expectations, creating a framework for making decisions collaboratively. But it's not, a magic wand.
Right, but it can definitely help prevent those power struggles and resentment. That can really derail any relationship.
Totally. And I like how the audio even mentions couples using this.
Yeah, for navigating all that, those household chores and finances and even, social commitments.
Yeah.
All that.
Like whose family are we seeing for Thanksgiving this year?
Exactly, yeah. Who's picking up the in-laws from the airport?
Okay, so that's the ICN bucket system. Let's move on to another story from the audio. This one is about Elizabeth. She's a lawyer, and her negotiation in Chicago hit a snag.
Oh, yeah. Elizabeth's story is a perfect example of what happens when autonomy is just totally overlooked.
Even with, the best of intentions.
Right. Even when you mean well.
So walk me through it. What happened?
So, Elizabeth, she flew to Chicago. She thought it was going to be like a routine business meeting, just to finalize an agreement. But she shows up with 2 of her associates.
Okay.
And basically presents this fully drafted agreement to the other party, a guy named John, without talking to him about it first.
Oh, wow. I can only imagine how John felt, completely blindsided. Talk about a curveball.
It's like showing up for a casual coffee date, and suddenly you're at a full-blown wedding ceremony.
Yeah, exactly.
And Elizabeth, she meant well, but she really stepped on John's sense of autonomy. She made assumptions about, the process and basically presented him with a done deal.
Oh, I see.
And so he felt, surprised. probably a little disempowered, maybe even like she was trying to manipulate him.
Yeah, it sounds like she missed that key step of communicating her intentions beforehand and like what her approach would be.
Exactly. Like imagine if she just gave him a quick call a few days before the meeting and said something like,
Oh, let me try it. Hey John, just thinking about our meeting next week. To make the most of our time together, I was thinking it would be good to have like a draft agreement ready. Would you rather have your team work on it or would you want mine to put something together? And oh, by the way, I was planning on bringing a couple of my associates. Feel free to bring some of your team along too.
perfect. See how that simple conversation just clarifies everything,
Yeah.
respects John's autonomy, and avoids that ambush feeling completely.
Totally. And it really sets a collaborative tone right from the beginning. But what I think is so interesting is how easy it was for Elizabeth to just overlook that. Like she was so focused on, efficiency and being prepared that she totally forgot about the human side of things.
It's a trap, especially for people who are super task-oriented, you know. But we have to remember that negotiations are ultimately about people interacting with people.
Yep.
And respecting each other's autonomy is, well, it's crucial for building that trust and reaching agreements that will actually last.
So to recap before you dive headfirst into all the details, it's crucial to get on the same page about how you're going to get there. Who has the authority to make which decisions? What's the level of involvement from each side?
Right. Get those things clear up front, and you'll save yourself so many headaches later on.
Totally. And that brings us to another really crucial part of negotiation, the whole concept of status.
Yes, status.
Okay, so I feel like when most people hear status in negotiation, they think it's all about like job titles and fancy degrees, right?
It's definitely a part of it, but it's much more nuanced than that. The audio actually distinguishes between two types of status:
Mm-hmm.
social status and particular status.
Okay.
Social status is that kind of broad societal ranking we all recognize.
Yeah.
You know, celebrities, CEOs, politicians, they tend to have high social status, and it's something we need to be aware of, but it's not the only kind of status that matters.
So then what's this other type? The one that's like actually relevant to our everyday negotiation?
That would be particular status.
Yeah.
It's all about the expertise and experience that you bring to a specific situation.
Uh-huh.
And here's the best part. Everyone has areas of high particular status.
Oh, I like that.
Think about it. You might not be a CEO, but maybe you're the go-to person in your office for troubleshooting those software glitches, right? Or maybe you are an amazing gardener who can, like, coax prize-winning tomatoes out of the most stubborn soil. Those are forms of particular status.
That's a really empowering way to think about it.
It is.
You're not comparing yourself to some external standard. You're recognizing the value that you bring to the table.
Exactly. And once you can recognize your own areas of high particular status, you can use them to your advantage when you're negotiating.
Okay.
It's not about like being arrogant or dismissive. It's about confidently asserting your expertise, contributing your unique point of view.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all comes together. Does the audio give any, like, specific examples of how this works in real life?
Actually, there's a pretty gripping story about a hospital where a clash over status almost had fatal consequences for a patient.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. A hospital. That seems like the last place you'd want status games to get in the way.
You'd think so, right?
Huh?
But these dynamics can show up anywhere,
Yeah.
unfortunately. In this case, you had this middle-aged man admitted to the hospital with chest pains, and the doctor, he was a young resident, he assesses him as like low risk for a heart attack. So he keeps him on a regular floor with a heart monitor. But then during the night, the nurse, she's monitoring the patient and notices some unusual heart rhythms.
Okay, that sounds like cause for concern.
Right. So she alerts the doctor.
Okay.
But the doctor, well, he feels challenged, right? And maybe a little insecure being the new guy.
I can see that, yeah.
And so he basically dismisses her concerns. He even asks her, like, how many patients with heart problems have you treated?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's got to be pretty demoralizing when you're trying to advocate for your patient.
Totally. And this is where the status stuff takes a dangerous turn.
Okay.
The nurse, she's feeling belittled. She starts to doubt herself. And she doesn't mention another really crucial detail that the patient had also experienced, like severe chest pain radiating up his arm.
Uh-oh. Classic heart attack.
Exactly. And because of this status clash, the doctor never got that key piece of information.
What happened to the patient?
A few hours later, he goes into cardiac arrest.
Oh, no.
And since he wasn't in the ICU, it took precious time for the resuscitation team to get there. He survived, but ended up on life support.
That's a chilling example of how status dynamics can literally be life or death.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it just underscores how important it is to recognize and value all forms of expertise, not just the ones that come with, fancy titles or social status.
Mhm.
In this case, the nurse's particular status, her close observation of the patient, her years of experience, that should have been given way more weight than the doctor's, general authority as a physician.
It seems like the doctor fell into what the audio calls status spillover, assuming that because he's a doctor, he's an expert on everything.
Yeah, it's so easy to do. We assume that because someone is high status in one area, they must be right about everything. But that's just not true. Everybody has their blind spots. And expertise in one area doesn't magically translate to being an expert in everything else.
This is making me think about all the times I've been in meetings and I've held back from sharing my ideas because I'd figured, well, these other people have more seniority, more experience, so they must know better.
It's a common experience.
Yeah.
But you have to remember that your particular status, your knowledge, your skills, the things that you bring to the table are valuable.
Okay, so we've talked about recognizing our own particular status, but how do we actually use it to our advantage in a negotiation?
That's where framing comes in. It's not about bragging or putting other people down, but it's about subtly highlighting your expertise in a way that benefits everybody. The audio has a great example with a story about an editor named George who was hired to work with this brilliant but kind of arrogant economics professor on some op-ed pieces for newspapers.
Ooh, that sounds like a status minefield, especially when you're dealing with a big-name professor.
Definitely. But George handled it really well. Instead of letting himself get intimidated, he acknowledged the professor's expertise right up front, but he also subtly highlighted his own area of particular status. He said something like, "You're the economics expert. I'm the reader comprehension expert."
I love that. It's not a competition. They each have a valuable role to play.
Exactly. It's a win-win. The professor gets to be the subject matter expert, and George gets to use his editorial skills to make sure the message is clear and engaging and accessible to a wider audience.
It's like a dynamic duo, each with their own superpower.
Exactly. And that's what's so cool about recognizing and using particular status.
Yeah.
It's not a zero-sum game. By acknowledging and leveraging each other's strengths, everybody wins.
This reminds me of that bar story you mentioned, the one with that unexpected tactic for handling a potentially dangerous situation.
Oh yeah, the power of asking for advice.
Right. So picture this. I'm at a bar in Pittsburgh, just jotting down some notes after a long day of negotiation training.
Always working.
Well, hey, a negotiator's work is never done, right? So I'm at the bar, and suddenly I hear this voice yelling, "Who does this guy think he is?"
Uh-oh.
I look over, and there are these two imposing guys just staring me down. And one of them actually says to me, "Do you realize you're dealing with danger?"
Yikes, that sounds intense.
So my brain is scrambling, right, trying to figure out a way to de-escalate this without looking weak or like provoking them even more. And then I remember something from the audio about how acknowledging someone's status can trigger all these like positive emotions.
Mhm.
So I take a gamble. I decide to ask them for advice.
Wait, you asked for advice from the guy who's threatening you.
It sounds crazy, I know, but these guys clearly saw themselves as like danger
Right.
experts. So I figure, why not tap into that?
What'd you say?
I looked the guy straight in the eye and I said, "What advice do you have for someone on how to deal well with danger?"
I would not have thought to do that.
The effect was like instantaneous. His whole demeanor just changed. He went from like aggressive and angry to almost like a mentor figure. He paused for a second, looked at me like he was about to share some profound wisdom, and then he just sat back down on his bar stool.
Wow.
Yeah, it was incredible. By asking for his advice, I'd like inadvertently acknowledged his status, and it completely diffused the situation.
It's amazing how powerful that can be.
Yeah.
It's not about giving in or letting yourself be intimidated. It's about strategically appealing to the other person's sense of self-worth, finding that common ground.
It's like using their own expertise to like disarm them without anyone actually getting hurt.
Exactly.
Which brings me to a question I've been thinking about. We've talked a lot about autonomy and status, but what happens when those two things are like in conflict?
Oh, I see.
Like, what if asserting my own autonomy means I have to challenge someone else's status?
Right, or vice versa.
Exactly.
That is a great question. And it leads us to the final concept from your audio. The importance of finding a fulfilling role in negotiation.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, so
Yeah.
a fulfilling role, it goes beyond just, like, getting what you want in a negotiation.
Okay.
It's about finding that sense of purpose and meaning in the process itself. The audio talks about 3 key qualities of a fulfilling role. You've got clear purpose, personal meaning, and authenticity.
Okay, break those down for me a little bit. What does that actually look like when you're negotiating?
So clear purpose means like you really understand your role and how it contributes to the bigger picture, the goal of the whole negotiation. And then personal meaning means that you feel a connection to the issue at hand, and your involvement aligns with your values and your beliefs.
Gotcha.
And then authenticity means like you're not putting on an act, you're not pretending to be someone you're not. You're showing up as your genuine self, using your unique skills and perspectives to contribute to a positive outcome.
This reminds me of that story in the audio about this guy named Ryan who was dreading his performance review with his boss. It sounded like they were both kind of trapped in these unfulfilling roles and the whole thing just went south.
Oh, yeah, poor Ryan. He walked into that meeting feeling like he was on trial, like ready to defend every action and deflect every criticism.
Yeah.
And his boss, well, he was stuck in that dictator role.
Yeah.
Just focusing on pointing out all the mistakes without offering any kind of constructive feedback. So neither of them felt good about it, and it's just a missed opportunity for everyone.
Sounds like a recipe for resentment and frustration all around. So how do we avoid that? How do we make sure we're creating roles that are actually fulfilling for everyone?
So the audio outlines a 4-step process for shaping your role in a negotiation.
Okay.
First, you name your current role.
Okay.
So like, what role do you see yourself playing in this situation?
Got it.
Second, you list the activities that are associated with that role. What are you actually doing in this negotiation?
Okay.
Third, you brainstorm activities that could make that role more fulfilling for you.
Okay, so like what could you add? What could you maybe modify? What could you even get rid of to make it align with your values and goals?
Exactly. And then finally, you talk about those ideas with the other people involved and try to come to some kind of like a shared understanding of how everybody can contribute in a way that feels meaningful and authentic.
Yeah, I love how that process really encourages you to be proactive. You're not just accepting whatever role is handed to you, you're actively shaping it to fit you. But let's be realistic. What if the other parties aren't on board with changing their roles? Like, they're totally fine with the status quo, even if it's not working for everyone.
That's where those communication skills we talked about earlier come in. It's about being brave enough to have those conversations, respectfully voicing your concerns, and advocating for a better experience for yourself and for everyone involved, really. Negotiation is all about finding creative solutions that meet everyone's needs. It might take some back and forth, some compromise, but you can find a way forward that works.
The audio talks about this great example of two directors of a youth education program, Paul and Sarah, I think their names were.
Right. They were constantly butting heads.
And it was causing tension throughout the entire organization. But when they finally sat down and had an honest conversation about their individual needs and aspirations, they completely changed their working relationship.
It really shows the power of open communication and being willing to adapt. They took the time to understand each other, find some common ground, and they were able to create roles that were both fulfilling and effective.
So it's like, instead of seeing roles as, fixed and unchangeable, we can think of them as something we can actually shape and refine over time. We're always asking ourselves, how can I contribute in a way that feels good and authentic? How can I help create a positive experience for everyone?
Yeah, that's the essence of mindful negotiation. It's not just about getting to yes, it's about getting to a yes that leaves everybody feeling respected and valued,
Yeah.
empowered.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into autonomy, status, and roles, what's the one thing you want our listener to walk away with?
I'd say it's this. Negotiation is all about connection. It's about understanding the needs, motivations, and perspectives of the people you're interacting with. And by, being mindful of these dynamics, communicating clearly and authentically, and actively shaping your role to align with your values, you can create more fulfilling and successful negotiation experiences for everyone.
Beautifully said. And remember, this deep dive was created just for you, based on the material you shared. We'd love to hear your thoughts. How are you going to apply these insights in your own life? Feel free to reach out with any questions or share your own negotiation stories. We are always eager to learn from our listeners. Until next time, happy negotiating.
Yeah, so how does this idea of a fulfilling role help us navigate those tricky situations where, autonomy and status might clash?
Exactly.
Well, a fulfilling role, it goes beyond just getting what you want. It's about finding, a sense of purpose and meaning in the process itself.
Mm.
The audio describes three key qualities of a fulfilling role. There's clear purpose, personal meaning, and authenticity.
Okay. Break those down for me. What does that actually look like, when you're sitting across the table from someone?
So clear purpose means you understand your role in the negotiation,
Uh-huh.
and you see how it fits into the bigger picture, the overall goal.
Okay.
Personal meaning means you feel connected to the issue. Like it aligns with your values.
Yeah.
And then authenticity means you're being your genuine self.
Right.
You're not putting on an act or pretending to be someone you're not.
Gotcha.
And you're using your unique skills, your perspectives, to contribute to a positive outcome for everybody.
This reminds me of that story from the audio about Ryan.
Oh, yeah.
He was dreading his performance review with his boss.
Oh, poor Rye.
And it sounded like they were both kind of stuck in these roles that just weren't fulfilling. And the whole thing was just like a train wreck.
Yeah, he walked into that meeting feeling like he was a defendant on trial.
Yeah.
Ready to defend every action, deflect any criticism.
Yeah.
And his boss was no help,
Yeah.
stuck in that dictator role.
Yeah.
Just focused on pointing out every little mistake, not really offering any constructive feedback.
Yeah.
So neither one of them felt good about it. And it was just a missed opportunity for growth and improvement.
Yeah, for everyone. It sounds like a recipe for just like resentment and frustration on both sides. So how do we avoid falling into those traps? How do we create roles that are actually fulfilling for everyone?
Well, the audio actually outlines a 4-step process for this.
Okay, I like it.
So first, you name your current role.
Yeah.
Like, what role do you see yourself playing right now in this negotiation?
Got it.
Then you list the activities that go along with that role.
Yeah.
What are you actually doing?
Okay.
Then third, you brainstorm activities that could make the role more fulfilling for you.
Okay, so you're thinking about what you could add, what you could modify, or even things you could like just get rid of completely to make it align more with your values and your goals.
Exactly. And then finally, you take those ideas and you talk about them with the other people involved.
Mm-hmm.
And you try to come to a shared understanding of how everybody can contribute in a way that feels meaningful.
Right, right. I really like how that process encourages us to be proactive. It's not just accepting whatever role, someone hands us. It's
Right.
about actually taking control and shaping it to fit us. But let's be real, what if the other people at the table aren't interested in changing their roles?
Okay.
Like, what if they're, comfortable with how things are, even if it's not working for everyone?
That's when those communication skills we talked about earlier become so important.
Right.
It's about like having those tough conversations,
Yeah.
respectfully voicing your concerns, and advocating for a better experience, not just for yourself, but for everyone. Remember, negotiation, it's all about finding those creative solutions that actually meet everyone's needs.
I see. Yeah.
It might take a little back and forth, some compromise,
Yeah.
but it's definitely possible to find a way forward that works.
The audio gave this great example about two directors of a youth education program, Paul and Sarah, I think.
Right. They were like constantly clashing.
And it was creating tension for the entire organization. But when they actually sat down and talked about their needs, their aspirations, their goals, they were able to totally transform their whole working relationship.
It's amazing what can happen when people are willing to communicate openly and to adapt.
Yeah.
They took the time to understand each other. They found that common ground. And then they were able to create roles that were, well, they were both fulfilling and effective.
So it's like instead of thinking about roles as like fixed and unchangeable,
Yeah,
we can see them as something that we can shape, we can refine over time.
exactly.
We can constantly ask ourselves, how can I contribute in a way that feels good and authentic? How can I create a more positive experience for everyone?
That's it. That's the essence of mindful negotiation.
Yeah.
It's not just about getting to yes. It's about getting to a yes that leaves everybody feeling good about the process, respected,
Right.
valued, empowered.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into autonomy, status, and roles, what's the one thing you really want our listener to remember?
I would say negotiation is all about human connection. It's about understanding those needs, the motivations, the perspectives of the people you're interacting with.
Mm.
And by being mindful of these dynamics, by communicating clearly and authentically, and by really taking ownership of your role, you can create more fulfilling and successful negotiations for everyone involved.
Beautifully said.
Mm.
And remember, this deep dive was created just for you, based on the material you shared. We'd love to hear your thoughts on all this. How are you going to apply these insights? Feel free to reach out with any questions or share your own stories. We are always eager to learn from our listeners. Until next time, happy negotiating.